Hi, so I just wanted to introduce Emily Fischer, who's at the Colorado State University and has been an assistant professor there since 2013. And so we are fortunate to have her today to talk about some of these best practices for preventing harassment in atmospheric science. And as I think you all know, we're interested in potentially learning from some of these lessons and including some of this information in the best practices paper. So Emily, thank you for joining us.
No problem. So hi everybody. So I am going to talk about grant, some results from a proposal that I have that's funded through the NSF. It's an Includes Eager Award. And so we've been working on figuring out how to leverage field campaign networks for collaborative change around sexual harassment. So I've put together 15 slides. I'm hoping to keep this on the short end of 20 minutes because I found in giving a similar presentation a couple weeks ago there were lots of questions and things to talk about. So I'll hope to leave us plenty of time for doing that. So this is I'm leading this work, but I really could not do it without Brittany Bloodhart, who's a gender psychologist who works in my lab. Actually, she'll be starting a faculty position in California shortly, and also Kristen Rasmussen, who's the PI of the other field campaign that we've piloted this with, and also a faculty at CSU. So, so why field campaign networks? So I actually think field campaign networks are pretty essential to addressing the problem of sexual harassment in the earth sciences, and this is why. So these field campaign teams involve collaborative multi-institutional teams. The networks that are built take years to establish, and they lead to enduring productive collaborations. And then the field missions dramatically expand the professional networks, publications, and career potential for trainees. And they include sort of extended interaction at major conferences and science team meetings. So there's a lot of power in these teams, and so that's why I think we need to work with these teams to make sure that both the men and women on these teams understand sort of their role in solving these issues. So this is what we did. So we surveyed 2 field campaign teams about past incidences and measures of social psychological scale. So ahead of the field programs, and I'll talk about the 2 field programs next, but ahead of the field programs, Brittany surveyed the 2 teams. What has happened in the past in your workplace, and how she asked sort of certain published scales that have been shown to predict harassment behavior in different groups. Then we trained each team to identify, prevent, and intervene in relevant situations. And we used slightly modified materials from the Advanced Geo project. So Advanced Geo, I put the link here so you can check it out, is a really wonderful project also led by other members of the Earth Science Women's Network Leadership Board. And so they have provided a lot of references and resources on this issue, and they have a training that they've put together, and we're testing sort of at the same time as I was training my team. So we were sort of at the front end of these materials, and we used them. And then for the second iteration, which I can talk more about later, we actually put a teamwork wrapper around their materials to make that more relevant and more I think better received by every member of the field team. And then we resurveyed both field campaign teams after the field campaigns. And then what we've been doing is presenting the results of these surveys to the teams themselves, discussing the findings and path forward. So I did this in a couple different ways at the American Meteorological Society meeting in January. We actually had a poster on the results of the sexual harassment surveys in the science team session. Then I walked everyone from the science team session over to a group lunch where we talked more about it. And I did the same thing at our science team meeting, and the Relampago will follow. The other field program will follow shortly. So the goal here is that more people are engaging with the issue, and that so there's more leadership potential. The information is really personal and relevant, and the network around fighting sexual harassment expands really naturally through the science collaborations. So there's currently 2 field campaign teams that are engaged, but this is growing. We actually have 2 more now, but they're not at the same stage. So we started with WeCan, which is the field program that I led last summer. This was a major NSF project. We sampled wildfire smoke in the western US for 6 weeks. And then the next field campaign was similarly large but different. This was Relámpago. That was on a study of extreme storms in Argentina, so it had an international, was both large scale and had an international component, and a similar scale of field work, 6 weeks in November and December 2018. So we used the harassment training materials adapted from Advanced Geo. I just have an example here, so if you go to that website, that's what you'll see. And the other intervention measures that we did included codes of conduct and handouts. So the PI team for WeCan, for example, we got together and we, at that time, a year ago, this is kind of surprising, but UCAR did not have a standardized harassment and reporting procedure, so we kind of ended up pushing them to make something accidentally while we were making something. So we have example harassment procedures. They're not policies, so they're not actually, the ones that I wrote for WeCan are not legally binding, and so they were reviewed by all our university legal teams as well to ensure that they were okay. And then we also handed out sheets about preventing and responding to sexual harassment, reminding them of things that people learned in the training. So for example, you can see here the 5 Ds, so directly confront, distract, delegate, delay, and document issues. We also set up people in the field who were volunteered, both a male and female lead, to be reporters, and so the people could come talk to. I think we could have improved that, but I'm happy to talk more about that. So these pre and post campaign surveys, these were online surveys sent before and after each field campaign. So all campaign members, students, staff, researchers were invited to participate, regardless of how much time they spent in the field. So again, it's about building the network around a field team. So there's a lot of people who don't go to the field that are still in that network. For the pre-survey, we had 100 participants, and that includes both WeCan and Relámpago. And the post-survey, I only have the WeCan numbers here, but our post-survey number now is something like 70. But so we had a mixture of women, men, and 1 gender-fluid individual. And then this is an example here just on the side, so you can see we are using validated social science scales, and then Brittany collected all that information for us. So here are the results of those surveys. So this, you can imagine, this is what I'm presenting back to our team members at lunches and science team meetings. So, and for you, this sort of gives you a sense of how prevalent this is in atmospheric science field teams. So almost half of the women have experienced sexual harassment. And so when Brittany first asked this question, she asked it in this way: have you ever been sexually harassed at work? And the colors here represent men versus women, right? So the men are reporting pretty often, never, and the women are reporting once, a couple of times, several times, and often. But what's really interesting is then Brittany asked very specific things. So have you ever experienced these specific things, rather than have you experienced harassment? So have you experienced verbal harassment, visual harassment, and she provided examples, physical harassment, physical assault, quid pro quo, or hostile work environment. So, so then you can see that the hostile work environment is the biggest source of sexual harassment, and then the percentage of women that report these things goes up when they understand what the sort of specific instances are. Here, I'll leave these up just for an example. Brittany had write-in comments that people could give specific examples. I don't need to read them to you, but these are the kinds of things that are getting reported by atmospheric science field teams. So some of them should make all of us very uncomfortable. The other thing that is very interesting is that women and men report different forms of harassment. So what you see on the graph here on the bottom is these most frequent forms of harassment. So someone putting hands on shoulders, people calling you babe or honey, obscene language, unwanted sexual jokes, things, and then we go down the list, someone leaning in closely, sort of personal space invasions, reading sexual messages or graffiti, and then having coworkers display sexualized images. And so you can see that the men and women are experiencing this differently, right? So women are more likely to have someone call them an inappropriate name, and men are more likely to hear obscene or abusive language and read messages maybe about someone else. And so they're reporting different forms of harassment, and so this is interesting to talk about as a group of men and women that you're sort of experiencing and seeing this differently. The large majority of the harassment goes unreported. So this is the percent of respondents who experienced sexual harassment and then what they did. So most people are avoiding or denying the issue, so that's why it's not so obvious that it's happening, maybe the supervisors. There's people social coping, and some people, a relatively small number, are confronting the issue or seeking some kind of advocacy. So Brittany, as a gender psychologist, is measuring social psychological scales, and these are attitudes about gender in society. And so she's measured 3 in our group, in us, so it's kind of funny to have data about ourselves, right? So first one is social dominance orientation. So this is valuing the hierarchy of social groups, for example, men over women. The second scale that she measured is hostile sexism. So this is sort of antagonistic attitudes toward women, and so the view that women are trying to control men. And then there's sexual harassment myth acceptance, and this is an endorsement of common misconceptions about sexual harassment. So in our sample, all of these were more likely to be endorsed by men than women. They're all related to each other, and they all predicted a greater likelihood of actually engaging in sexual harassment when people reported that. So they would report whether they've engaged in harassment, and then they would also report their measures about gender and society via these scales as part of the survey. So this is the positive news about the advanced Geo Training. So both women and men increased their comfort to intervene in harassment after the training as compared to before. And so, so that's really positive. We do have some negative things as we found from the training, some cynicism and things like that, people reporting that they were bored. But those are very small numbers, and I think that in the way we presented the training the second time around, where we wrapped it in a teamwork wrapper to sort of give the context that we're a big team here, we all need to work together, and we need to, safety is part of safety and keeping everybody working well together. Part of that is preventing harassment. So, so I think that worked well on the second time, but this is also just really positive that we appear to see, people increasing their comfort in intervening after the discussions we had during the training. So even with our efforts, there were still inappropriate behavior that occurred during weekend in Relampago, and at least during my field campaign, which was weekend, none of this was reported to me as the PI. So, but again, these are relatively minor, thank goodness, things, not to dismiss them in any way, but thank goodness, things that happened, but they still happened even with a largely female PI team. So weekend was a mix of men and women in the PI team, a pretty even mix actually, which is very unique for atmospheric science. And we had a policy, and we did the training, and we were revisiting this frequently. So even during that, people reported someone making sexual comments about their looks, and someone using obscene, offensive language, and then there was a cruel comment reported about sexual orientation that people experienced, and then and people were observing obscene, offensive language being used. So, so our next steps for my particular project, which again is relatively small, as a NSF Eager project is to onboard more field campaigns. And so we actually are collecting a little bit more data this summer. We have Ankur Desai, who's the lead of the Cheesehead campaign. He has come forward and volunteered to have his field team surveyed. So Brittany just sent them the surveys, I think. And so we'll do the same pre and post. They're doing a training, and then we'll do the same thing for the FireX-AQ team, which is a major NASA NOAA mission this summer to, again, sample wildfire smoke. So again, that's a logical extension of my Wildfire Smoke We Can project. And so we're hoping that that will serve as the basis for a publication both on the social scales in our field and on some of these incidences and prevalence of sexual harassment in atmospheric science field campaign teams. And then the second thing that I need to do, and I'll hopefully have this done by the end of the summer, is I'll create a recipe book for PIs. So just a very clear instructions on what we did and how we did it so that other people can easily sort of follow that even if they're not as comfortable talking about these issues. They can try to follow a best practices based on what we did. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take questions or discuss any of this.
Great. Thank you, Emily. So as a reminder, if you have any questions for her, use the raise your hand feature in ReadyTalk, and I'll take you off mute. Otherwise, you can type your questions in the chat box. So any questions? Let's see. One from Kevin. All right, go ahead, Kevin.
Awesome, yeah. So maybe I have sorry, now I have too much stuff going on the computer. I have a question about, you kind of saw this improvement, with the campaigns, with when they had the training. And I'm curious if you broke it down by any more demographics beyond gender. If this improvement, it's two campaigns, right? So it's a little, there's maybe a little bit of selection bias, but I'm curious of whether there's anything in terms of maybe stage of career and whether that was perceived as.
We did not break it down by that. And in fact, to see the significance results, we had to lump both campaigns. For the women, it's a lower number. So that's part of doing the same thing with the next two campaigns ahead of publication, right? So that we can break it down a little bit more. I can tell you in general from running through this training, and I've been talking to my team about this, and people are getting really comfortable now talking to me about it, which is very rewarding. The graduate students are very comfortable talking about these issues. They are incredibly relieved to have the PIs talk about it and to see the struggles with it. So the graduate students are very thankful and very relieved. Some other things that the graduate students pointed out that they needed was just sort of stress relief during the field campaigns and more talking about how everything was going, not necessarily about harassment. And then there were definitely people on the field campaign team, broadly, largely not the academics, I would say, that were at least a little bit resistant to talking about this.
Cool. Yeah, interesting. I guess I'm wondering kind of, a further kind of step back is I think I'm not an expert in this, but I assume as an early career person, I feel like I'm even more likely to kind of talk about these type of things. And I'm just curious if there is something, that the data will eventually show, that kind of shows it at stages of career or even, how much responsibility a person has of whether they're willing to engage as much. So that's very interesting.
I have a question by Janet. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much, Emily. That was a fantastic presentation. It was really illuminating. I have lots of questions, so I'm going to try and restrict it to a couple. So you sort of alluded to one of my questions there. Did everybody participate in the survey? Everyone in your weekend team?
Not everyone participated, and not everyone participated in the training.
Okay.
And so but a large majority did.
Right.
And so I can't make these things mandatory. We have an IRB, right, because we're ourselves here. So it's not mandatory, but basically I sent a message on behalf of all the PIs, and I had full PI support in doing this. So that made a huge difference. So they all encouraged everyone to participate. Right.
And then you mentioned that you were surprised, for instance, that UCAR had no formalized.
Yeah, we ended up having to have our policy reviewed by their legal, and then they were working on one in tandem, and it was actually a little bit awkward. And I don't mean this to be critical of UCAR in any way, but when you read that through the National Academy report on this is not really a legal issue. This is a cultural issue, and so I'm in my discussions. I'm really actually trying to not bring up anything legal. I'm trying very hard to make this not a legal issue, but more about a teamwork culture and protecting our people and working well together. And so yeah, we did end up forcing them to have a policy for that. I assume, I don't know this, but I assume then would be used on other aircraft missions.
That's exactly what I was trying to get at. For instance, I'm a physical oceanographer, so I go out to sea a lot, and our UNOLS vessels, who, UNOLS is the national facility for running these vessels, the research vessels that we go out, and they have, only in the last few years, have developed a sexual harassment policy that they distribute, when you get ship time and things like that. And so you're saying now, I don't even know much about how this operates in atmospheric science. Does UCAR, are they responsible for all the aircraft facilities that
that's right. NCAR is responsible for the aircraft facilities. That's right. And so they have a safety briefing, and so I did the sexual harassment training on the same day as the aircraft safety briefing.
Right.
But what I didn't do was wrap it in this teamwork wrapper, and then when we did it with Relampago, they did their sort of general safety, and then we wrapped the teamwork around this thing, so it was all still part. So that's part of the logistics of working with the other field campaign teams, is I've been kind of advising them on how and when to do it. So like when your team is together, how do you fit it in? How does it work well, sort of with the other things you need to talk about and that kind of stuff.
Right. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, question by Charlotte. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi. Of course. Hi, Charlotte.
Okay. Hi, Emily. Thanks for the talk. So I had one is a comment and one is a question. So my comment is, it seems that in one of the earlier graphs you showed, when the forms of sexual harassment were more clearly defined, that the response of the men went up compared to just a general definition.
That's right.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. So maybe there is some sort of disconnect or just lack of understanding among both men and women what actually does constitute sexual harassment. So I thought that was
that's been, and Charlotte was in the little pilot that we tried for the department, right? Didn't you come to that? So that was really interesting too, sort of some discussions that I think need to happen amongst this community, is that it's not the intention, it's the impact that matters. And so these actions have impact. So, and I think there's some, just getting that realization is a really important first step too. But yes, you're right here.
Yeah, and then my question sort of goes back to this this issue you talk about, that you learn to sort of present this wrapped in a teamwork. And I mean, what are some of the lessons? I take it that maybe you got some sort of pushback from people who were asked to receive this. So, like,
I did.
I did. So, I mean, can you talk about that a little bit more? Or because I guess really, NSF is saying this is a great idea to present this, but that there may be people who are told you have to go to this who feel maybe that they're being accused or they're doing something wrong or something.
Yeah, so I've actually had a lot of men talk to me about that, including my PhD advisor.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I feel super blamed, I don't know what to do, and I was like, listen, you just need to lead. You're not being blamed. You need to help and lead, and because I have a close relationship with him, that was a relatively easy, though it's not easy because it's about harassment, discussion to have. So I did receive quite a bit of pushback from the weekend training, and some of this might have been my own perception, but I think some of the men that were on the team were not sure what to make of me because I was sort of bringing this up, right? And they did not realize until into the field campaign that my goal really was to make the team work as well as possible together and to protect people, and who largely the graduate students working under me, and not to blame anyone or and not to blame anyone. And it's not a gotcha or anything like that. And so I think that when the advanced Geo Training is great in that it works for a lot of groups, right? It's kind of general, but for these field campaign teams, there's a lot of trust there, and these people are working together. So I think anything that can be done to frame it and to understand what types of bad training people have been exposed to before, or what kind of sort of legal-focused discussion of this that they've been exposed to before, the training has to be presented in that way. And so I think it really helps to have male PIs as champions. And it's been interesting to watch that happen now. So where some people who have come to the weekend training are now like, oh, we should do this as part of something else, right? And it can be received very differently if it's coming from a male colleague that you trust and know and have worked with for a long time rather than coming from a woman. So I think there's some dynamics there still to be conscious of and work out because, So I do think that me pushing this, one, I don't feel like I had a choice to push it, right? It was a large team and I needed to protect everyone. But also there were definitely some early implications of me doing that, which I think I won everyone over in the end. And, I just saw everyone and I got big hugs from everybody. But, they did not know what to make. Many of the men did not know what to make of it in the beginning.
Yeah.
So
I guess I wonder if there's any logic perhaps to first appealing to people. Imagine, for the men, imagine women in your life that you care about. If someone you care about were experiencing this.
Yeah, so I have some ideas on that.
Everyone here is cared about by someone, and we just want to make sure that this is a good experience for everyone. So anyway,
and
so
one thing Brittany and I are really interested in looking at next is how do we get men to feel comfortable talking about this issue. And so I was talking to some male colleagues about this, and I said, well, I'm white, and so I was like, well, guys, don't you think it's uncomfortable for me to talk about race? But I still need to be better, and I still need to figure out how to talk about this and how to protect people. And they said, oh, that makes us feel so much better, that you're and so just sort of we're figuring out it. Brittany and I are starting to think about if there's research on sort of race discussions also that we could leverage and how to get people more comfortable to be sort of vulnerable and think about these issues.
Yeah. Thanks.
No worries. Thanks. Is there another one, Victoria? Or are we done? Maybe Victoria's saying we're done.
Let's go with Victoria's as the last question due to time. So go ahead, Victoria. Hello? Victoria, can you hear us? All right, so I don't hear Victoria on the line. Do we have any other final questions for Emily before we...
Are you guys...
Victoria?
I'm sorry, my audio is disconnected. So I was really finding that... Sorry, is anyone there?
Yep,
getting...
we're here.
I feedback. There we go. Okay. I was really in that last session and thinking about the terrible sexual harassment trainings that we've had here at work and how much they put people off. I think this concept of reframing the discussion as centering on harassment in general and harassing activities, whether they're sexually oriented or not, and how that will make the team less productive is really, really nice approach to consider. And you mentioned the reporting issue, and I wondered, one of the things that I have wondered about is that we often give people as reporters who are very senior, and I wonder if you guys have considered trying to come up with individuals to report to that sort of were in different hierarchies, male, female, young, old, and so on.
That is something we should have done, and I did not realize that people, like, so I am a mandatory reporter as a faculty member, and so I should have, now in retrospect, I have a sense of who I should have put as the female reporter or someone to talk to, but I did not realize that no one would talk to me as the lead PI. I did not realize that, even though I was sort of, championing this issue and these kinds of things. So I agree with you 100%. And I was actually talking about this with folks when I visited Berkeley a couple weeks ago of this struggle of, you have the lead person, and then they're often mandatory reporters. And I mean, we had something in our policy that said we will not sort of report unless the victim wants us to report. And so we had language there, but I agree with you. We need to think more as a community about setting up a structure so that there's definitely people that everyone's comfortable talking to, and multiple people.
Great. Any final questions before we log off? All right, so I don't see any. So thank you, Emily, for presenting, and thank you for everyone who participated today. So I'll have a posting of this presentation on our US CLIVAR YouTube channel by early next week, so stay tuned for it. I'll send out an email and tweet about it once it's uploaded. So thank you, Emily, and thank you, everyone, for participating.
No worries, and please feel free to reach out if you have more questions or want to use materials or anything like that.